with the U.S. as it reportedly orders Chinese airlines to stop taking deliveries of Boeing planes and to not buy the aircraft-related equipment from American companies.
They're being imposed a tariff of up to 145%. Now, what we know this time is that the Chinese government has asked its carriers to stop taking delivery of Boeing aircraft in the meantime.
China has responded in Donald Trump's trade war, halting orders of Boeing aircraft.
US President Donald Trump has remained firm that China must be first to step up to the negotiating table on tariffs. Beijing has reportedly blocked further deliveries of Boeing jets in retaliation to Washington, D.C.
What if the real battlefield between China and the United States isn't the Indo-Pacific, but the skies? Welcome. Here, every analysis exposes the backstage of the global power game. Today, we investigate how a disruption could cost over $150 billion in contracts, impact thousands of companies in the American production chain, and reconfigure the global balance of civil aviation. A new move has been made. The question is, who will have the fuel to endure until the end? In the silence of a technical statement, China issued an order that could cost billions. It suspended deliveries of Boeing commercial jets. The reaction was immediate. Within days, the company's shares plummeted nearly 10%. What seemed like a technical gesture revealed itself as a calculated move. Civil aviation, for decades a symbol of American industrial strength, has now become a geopolitical battleground. And when China closes its doors, it doesn't just pressure Boeing. It pressures the U.S. economy, its export chain, and thousands of jobs on American soil. This is the start of a new phase in the trade war, a phase where planes become weapons and billion-dollar contracts turn into bargaining chips. The suspension is just the beginning, and the data that follows shows why this move could reshape the global trade balance. The scale of the impact begins to emerge in the numbers. Of the 4,500 aircraft ordered globally from Boeing, over 1,200 involve China, directly or indirectly. In other words, about a quarter of the company's future was tied to the Chinese market. The weight is both financial and strategic. Sales to Chinese airlines generate $10 to $12 billion annually, and that figure doesn't account for parallel contracts like maintenance, spare parts, and technical services, which further deepen Boeing's reliance on Beijing. Each wide-body plane can exceed $300 million. Even smaller single-aisle models easily surpass $100 million. Cutting this flow is far more than losing customers. It's compromising one of Boeing's revenue pillars. Nearly $12 billion in potential revenue vanishes from Boeing's horizon with a single gesture from Beijing. But the real shock isn't in the isolated numbers. It's in what they signal. The 9 to 10% drop in shares within days wasn't just a reaction to the suspension. It was panic over what might come next, a series of retaliations, a shift of orders to Airbus, and the possibility of a prolonged lockout from the Chinese market, the world's second largest. On shareholders' radar, the fear is now structural. If the trade war escalates, Boeing may not just be losing contracts, it may be losing its future. In 2024, Chinese orders for Boeing and Airbus totaled about $14.5 billion, a divided market, but with decisive room for maneuver. If Beijing boosts its Airbus purchases or accelerates COMAC's domestic projects, Boeing's share could be halved, limited to $5 or $6 billion annually. This redirection isn't symbolic. It has the power to devalue up to $40 billion of Boeing's market capitalization over time. It's not just a change of supplier. It's a realignment of technological dependence, and for Boeing, perhaps the definitive entry into vulnerable territory. The damage isn't limited to Boeing's revenue. It reverberates across the entire architecture of U.S. exports. Civil aviation accounts for $130 to $140 billion in annual U.S. exports, with Boeing at the center of this flow. China alone represents up to 18% of that total. Losing this client equates to a billion-dollar hole in the U.S. external balance. And the domino effect is domestic. Boeing's production chain spans nearly every U.S. state, from engines in Alabama to avionics in Ohio. Thousands of suppliers, jobs, and local economies are interconnected. Some estimate that in the engine parts sector alone, 5,000 to 10,000 jobs could vanish by the end of 2025 if the suspension persists. Not every move comes without cost. and Beijing knows it. Replacing Boeing immediately isn't trivial. Models like the 777, 787, and 737 MAX still form the backbone of China's intercontinental aviation routes. Switching to Airbus requires more than a contract signature. It demands months of transition, pilot retraining, infrastructure adaptation, and million-dollar logistical costs. COMAC, while strategic, isn't yet operating at full scale. Projects like the C-19 and CR-929 are advancing, but are far from meeting demand in volume and reliability. Even so, China seems willing to pay this price in the short term, as long as the impact is even deeper on the other side of the Pacific. The backdrop of this clash is tariffs, but the impact is industrial. Washington raised the stakes with tariffs of 25% to 50% on China's strategic sectors, even threatening to escalate to over 100% in some cases. Beijing responded in kind, restricting agricultural products, energy, and now civil aviation. The suspension of Boeing orders is the peak of this escalation. Agreements with the Chinese market, valued between $150 and $160 billion, are at this moment on the brink of collapse. If this demand shifts to Airbus or is captured by emerging manufacturers like COMAC, the loss won't be temporary. It will be structural and long-term. The atmosphere isn't just commercial, it's political. Trump directly accused Beijing of breaking the Boeing deal and doubled down on rhetoric that China is punishing the U.S. with unfair tariffs and currency manipulation. The rhetoric makes it clear there's no intention of backing down. The government sees the dispute as part of a broader strategy, and Boeing has calculated collateral damage. Meanwhile, rumors gain traction. Airbus is reportedly close to signing a new order with China, possibly 150 units. If this happens, Boeing won't just lose market share. It will lose relevance. For the company's executives, this is the worst-case scenario imaginable. For analysts, it may just be the start of a deliberate replacement, political, commercial, and technological. Over the past 5 years, Boeing has generated over $50 billion from sales to China alone, and more was expected. Chinese airlines plan to acquire over 500 aircraft in the next decade, with Boeing positioned as the primary supplier. Each delivery can yield between $100 million and $300 million, reaching $500 million when maintenance and spare parts contracts are included. Now, this flow is at risk. The gap that opens, if confirmed, won't be easily filled. Airbus is watching closely. The CR-929 project, a China-Russia partnership, is also on the radar. But both still face technical and logistical limitations to fill this space immediately. If the cancellation solidifies, Boeing won't just lose orders, it will lose an entire decade of projections. In the power struggle between the world's two largest economies, planes have ceased to be just machines crossing the skies. They've become vectors of influence. China's decision to suspend Boeing deliveries isn't just a commercial sanction. It's a calculated signal on a geopolitical scale. For Beijing, this is a high-risk, high symbolic value play, even knowing that fully replacing Boeing will require time, technical adaptation, and high operational costs. The decision was made with a clear goal: to show that China is willing to sacrifice some logistical comfort as long as it rebalances the political chessboard. On the other side, Boeing sees the measure as a political blockade disguised as a commercial decision. Its lobbyists are already warning Congress. If the impasse persists, exclusion from the Chinese market could become permanent, not for 5 or 10 years, but for an entire generation. The numbers confirm the warning: $7.4 billion in revenue from China in 2024 alone, and an expectation to reach $10 billion in 2025. That projection is now close to being erased from the books, but the risk goes beyond aviation. Beijing is signaling that the move against Boeing may just be the start. American chemical products, semiconductors, and agricultural commodities are under review. Each is a vital cog in the U.S. export machine. If retaliated against in a coordinated manner, the impacts won't just be sectoral, they'll be macroeconomic. The threat isn't a traditional trade war. It's a continuous silent attrition, with progressive disruptions disguised as technical decisions. A type of confrontation where escalation doesn't come through explosions, but through successive disruptions in global chains. In this scenario, civil aviation was just the first piece sacrificed. And the lesson from Beijing is clear: the cost of commercial pressure will be met with a response, even if both sides bleed in the process. Amid this impasse, the real question isn't who wins, but who can withstand the pressure longer. The suspension of Boeing orders is just a symptom. Behind it lies a much deeper dispute. Who controls the critical flows of the global economy? Who sets the pace of industrial chains? And who depends on them to survive? If civil aviation, long considered a technical and stable sector, has become a weapon of strategic retaliation, what else can be mobilized as an instrument of power? Are we witnessing a silent reconfiguration of the rules of international trade, or just an unchecked escalation, where diplomacy gives way to the logic of economic intimidation? Share your take in the comments, because in the new game of global power, interpreting the signals is the first step to understanding who really writes the rules.